wrestling fans. Kurt Clapier here with highschoolwrestlingmatches.com, and I have a special guest on today's podcast, Brandon Ruiz, and I'm going to let Brandon explain all his credentials because I think I'll mess him up, but he was a state championship, I know, for a state champion wrestler for Taylorsville High School back in the 90s, and one-time state champ or two-time, Brandon?
Actually, no time.
Oh, I'm
I placed
wrong.
I placed a couple
You were
times.
like you were like 5 years older than me, and I always remembered you as a state champ.
Well, that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
No, I placed a couple times, and then I won a bunch of freestyle and Greco type stuff.
And then after high school, I know you made a name for yourself on the national Greco scene. How high did you get there?
I was third in Greco the first time back, and then second in freestyle, fifth in Greco, and then third again in Greco.
Okay. And this is senior, like world team trials or senior nationals, right?
That was like the the ESPA on the university age.
Okay.
And then at the senior level, I was eighth, fourth, and eighth.
That's impressive. That's really good. And so at what point did you start adding grappling in? And this is the main reason we have Brandon on tonight, guys, because there's a lot of wrestlers out there that want to stay involved. I was even reading on the openmat.com. It's a wrestling forum that a lot of guys get on. I was reading on that today. There's guys like 32 years old, 35 years old, posting on there. Where can I wrestle? I want an adult wrestling club to go wrestle at, and they're most likely not guys that are at the senior level, but they want to stay involved. And so grappling is an option. I want to let people know is out there. How did you get involved in it? What was your experience?
I actually got exposed to grappling while I was still at BYU, back when they still had a program. Mark Schultz was our coach. He had done some jiu-jitsu. He'd actually fought Hickson Gracie there in the BYU wrestling room, which was an interesting story. And Hickson called him, challenged him, and then Schultz took him down and cradled him up and squoze on him for about an hour, and then Hickson finally submitted him, and then after that, Schultz was hooked, and he wanted to learn jiu-jitsu, so consequently, all of us as his wrestlers got exposed to it a little bit.
Did that little scrimmage with Gracie, did that happen before? I'm assuming before Schultz's fight?
Yeah, that was long before. That was a couple years before he ever fought in the UFC.
Did you get to see it? Were you there when Hickson came in?
No, that was before my time even. So yeah, it was earlier on. But yeah, he showed us jiu-jitsu. I hated it at the time, but after I finished my school, I went on a mission, LDS church mission, for a couple of years, and then when I got back, I had to get a knee surgery just because I had a knee that had been bugging me for a long time, and ended up needing an ACL replaced. So come to find out, I'd wrestled half of my collegiate career without an ACL. Would have made a big difference to know.
Like it was torn the whole time?
Yeah, it was completely gone. There was nothing there.
What? How's that possible?
I don't know. It just happened. I don't know.
That's crazy.
I was ornery back then, and I just said, "Suck it up, you pansy," and just kept going. But yeah. Anyway, after all of that, I was looking for something to keep me going, and just got into jiu-jitsu and grappling, and then I actually got into that, and then had the opportunity to go train at the Olympic Center, and kind of kept doing grappling as I was out there in Colorado training and wrestling. Kept advancing up the belt ranks, and then eventually moved back to Utah after we had our first daughter, after she was born, and then just kept grappling and doing jiu-jitsu ever since, and just fell in love with it, and was able to compete at the international level, and won a number of titles, world titles in FILA, Sport Jiu-Jitsu International Federation, Pancrase, Grappler's Quest, NAGA. So I've been around the block as far as grappling. It's been a lot of fun, but it was very much for me kind of the next progression of my wrestling. I felt like I was able to attain more of the international success that I'd wanted, in grappling that I was not able to get out of Greco-Roman. And I was a pretty good Greco guy, don't get me wrong, but it was just, I wasn't quite on that world level yet. And so by adding jiu-jitsu to my already strong wrestling game, I became very tough in grappling competition.
So is there a difference? Because I don't think a lot of wrestlers know this, so I'm asking this question, myself included. Is there a difference between jiu-jitsu and grappling, other than the uniform?
To a degree, the jiu-jitsu, like pure jiu-jitsu, is all done in the kimonos, the jacket and the pants and the belts and stuff. The karate uniform. My wrestler buddies give me a bad time about my karate uniform, but but grappling, as when I say grappling, I think of how Fila's set it up. They've actually made it so that it's more inclusive, whereas the no-gi jiu-jitsu or the gi jiu-jitsu is more gear. It favors the Brazilian type of jiu-jitsu. The Fila style of grappling, or the UWW style of grappling, is more gives more opportunity for takedowns and things like that, where a wrestler can be strong and not be penalized. And I've fought some of the toughest guys in the world in the Fila and the UWW. So as well as in the Brazilian, but I think that the grappling is more complete. And so the rule set is, as everybody knows in wrestling, the goal is to pin your opponent. Whatever you do on the way to the pin, you get points, so you can win by pin or by points. Well, with grappling, the goal is to submit your opponent. So whatever you do on your way to get the submission, you can get points or win by submission. And the points in grappling, you get points for takedown and side control and mount and back control, which is having both hooks in. And there's takedown points. What else? I think that's it. And then with jiu-jitsu, there's basically the same points available, but they just go about them a little bit differently. In UWW, you don't get points for passing the guard. You get points for having a side control. But with the Jiu-Jitsu Federation, as soon as you get past the guard, you should get points. It's kind of the same thing, but a little different. It's just nuances.
Right.
But if you go to like the international grappling tournaments, you'll find guys that are good in wrestling and sambo and judo and jiu-jitsu, and they'll be good at like a number of different things. Whereas if you go to the jiu-jitsu tournaments, you'll find guys that are just really good at jiu-jitsu, and they'll fall down and they'll butt scoot and they'll pull guard and they'll do all those kinds of things and won't really stand up.
They're more jiu-jitsu specialists.
Yeah, they'll just lay down. Especially if you're a tough wrestler, the jiu-jitsu guys will generally just kind of fall over for you. And I used to get bugged at that, but I got over it and said, well, I'll just pass your guard and beat you that way. It just makes my job a little easier.
You learn how to submit. So let's start with the like if someone's brand new to grappling, a wrestler comes out of high school and maybe their wrestling career's over or mostly over, or even maybe they wrestled in college and they're done. At the very bottom level, where do you start with grappling? Do you just go find a gym, or do they call it a dojo? I don't even know. An academy?
Yeah, gym, dojo, whatever you want to call it, depends on who's running the place. I would say there's a lot of places that do MMA now, and they're probably a little more wrestler friendly, quote unquote. The pure jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu type schools, I think for a wrestler might be a big culture shock, because you're getting into a uniform, you're getting smothered by a piece of cloth, some guys wearing pajamas and flipping upside down and trying to choke you with all that stuff, and it's really different. And so if you come in as a wrestler thinking that you're just going to own the place, you're going to have a bad experience. So number one would be have a good attitude and be humble and willing to learn, if that's really what you want to do, is get into jiu-jitsu and grappling. And then number two, I would say probably look at an MMA school to start. Just if no other reason, you'll be able to start without the gi. And I know that's kind of counterintuitive for guys that do jiu-jitsu, but I think if you're going to be a wrestler, if you're going to do grappling and no-gi jiu-jitsu, the time you spend in the gi, it's okay, but it's not. It's basically like telling a Greco or a freestyle guy, "Hey, go do a couple years of judo and then come back and you'll be a better wrestler." It's like it's applicable, but it's not specific enough. And so it really depends on what your end goal is. I know a lot of the wrestlers just go right into fighting in the MMA because there's money, and I don't blame those guys, but grappling is a lot safer and it's a lot of fun if you don't aspire to having to get paid or trying to be a professional athlete in that regard. Um, and I actually started out kind of along that same way, the MMA school, and then eventually got interested in the gi, and then I went all the way through with the gi and got my black belt. Uh, so I am belted in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's just I don't put the gi on very often. I maybe put it on, I don't know, maybe 5 times a year, if that, at this point, just because.
So you have a black belt in actual Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Is there also belt levels in no-gi grappling, or how's that work?
There's starting to be that. There's more of a desire for people to do that, and there's some schools that do have degrees of black belt in the no-gi. There's a lot of the traditionalist Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners and instructors that are really against that because it hurts their. I think they feel like it hurts their business and their credibility, but I really don't see it that way. I look at it as like, look, these guys want to play jiu-jitsu without a gi all the time, and these guys don't play it with a gi all the time. And I think there's room for everybody. And there's so many more competitions nowadays than there was just even 5 years ago or 10 years ago that I don't see what the big deal is. And so, for me, I'm like, just do what you want. It's your life, it's your grappling journey. So don't.
So if you are belted and you're doing true jiu-jitsu, uh, are you competing against guys with same belts, or how does that work? Or
Yeah.
straight weight classes, or what?
So it's similar to wrestling in that you have weight class. You'll have a weight class, but it's different than wrestling because you have belt levels and age levels on top of your weight class. So for guys that want an actual shot at fairness, it's not a bad way to go because you got weight class and you got age, and then you got your skill level. And there are some guys that sandbag, but I think for the most part, people are generally fairly honest. And so if you're starting out as a white belt, 180 pounder, and you're 35 years old, you're going to fight other guys that are 35 years old, white belt, 180 pounds. So
Gotcha.
it really allows you to fight guys that are at or near your level. And that's one of the things that I like about it. One of the things that I dislike about it is that then you have guys thinking that they're
National champs.
national champs, right? And so that's the only real drawback. But if you can get over that, then it's not that big of a deal.
It's like kids wrestling. Kids wrestling, there's like 30 tournaments in the country that call themselves the national championships.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yeah. So speaking of the organization of it, I've gotten into running since I quit competing in wrestling, and running has no wrestling's pretty much run by USA Wrestling outside of the college and high school level, right? It's pretty much USA Wrestling. You work your way up the ranks. If you can become number one, you can go compete internationally, or even if you're top 3 or 4, you'll sometimes get some international competitions, and they kind of run the show. And then FILA, you mentioned FILA, they run the show internationally. And then running, on the other hand, running's not like that. Anyone who wants to can throw up a running competition outside of college, and go with it. What am I asking? I'm asking if is grappling organized like that. So once you start training and you want to get involved, are you a member? Is there a USA Grappling, something along those lines? I guess what I'm getting at.
Sort of. It's probably closer to how running is set up just by your description. So there's FILA or UWW. There's the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, which is the most, I guess, accredited, for the lack of a better word. They're like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu organization in the world. And so most guys will go compete at their tournaments just because they're kind of the recognized authority.
That'd be in a gi though, right?
They have no-gi also.
Yeah, both. Okay.
Yeah, and then you've got Abu Dhabi Combat Club, or ADCC, which is like is just all no-gi grappling, and that's like considered the very top. And then you got like a bunch of other groups like FILA and the Sport Jiu-Jitsu International. You got Pancrase, or at least they were a few years ago. You've got NAGA, and you've got Grappler's Quest, and they all have different promotions and different guys compete in.
So it's kind of how fighting does it, sort of.
Yeah, it's that's the thing. It's all promotions and different organizations, and so if you want to go to one over the other, that's fine. Nobody's gonna hold it against you. You might not be as well recognized. I know that some of the tournaments that I've won, like, they're not as well recognized, but I would say that I'm every bit as tough as those other guys that are competing in like the IBJJF or the ADCC. I've actually fought in the trials at ADCC back years and years ago, like 10 years ago. Did pretty well there. So it's not, I mean, it's not like you're necessarily limiting your ability. It's just what group do you want to support and which group works for you.
Is it like fighting in that you're sort of owned by them? You stay in that league, or can you go to one? Can you go to a competition in one league or one weekend, and the next weekend go to another one?
Yeah, as far as I know, I've never had any problems going to different stuff. I know I would assume that there's probably some limitations for a few of them. Like, there's a few that are paid. Right now, I'm entered in one called Proving Grounds Invitational, and that one's coming up here in Layton in September, and that one is an actual paid event. And so that's like a paid promotion, and I have to do certain things and stay in certain parameters up until the time of that competition. But other than those kind of tournaments, you're really not limited.
I was going to ask about getting paid. So how does the pay work if you are at that level?
The only paid tournament for a long time was the ADCC, and now you see tournaments like the Eddie Bravo Invitational. You see Metamoris, which, from what I understand, they're now disbanded. But there's a few groups out there like that are starting to have money. Grappler's Quest has had money in the past. They're not doing a whole lot right now either. But
do you have to win? Do you have to win these?
Yeah, it's usually winner take all type situation. Sometimes they'll do prize money for like first through third, but it's generally speaking winner take all type format.
Is it a decent chunk, or is it just like covers your travel expenses?
Depends on the tournament. Like the Eddie Bravo, the guys there won like 30 grand, 50
Wow.
grand, something like that the last couple. So
how would you qualify for something like that?
You get invited.
Really?
Yeah, it's at some level it's kind of like you got to be good, but you also got to be kind of famous. And so that's like the hard thing. Like, there's a lot of good guys out there that are not famous, whereas in wrestling, like Jordan Burroughs, everybody knows who he is, or like Kyle Snyder, or it's my thing. Like, just name whichever national wrestling champion, and everybody's probably heard of him in the wrestling community.
Right. It's because they've organized it in a way that all the best guys eventually wrestle each other, and you see who comes out.
So with jiu-jitsu, it's not always that way. You got guys that are just, like myself, that have won stuff, but not really a household name in the jiu-jitsu community. But there's probably a lot more guys in my situation than there are super famous guys. And I don't necessarily think that the famous guys are all that super tough. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen, like, some of them I've seen, I'm like, that guy's here, but why is he there? I can beat that guy, or I have beat that guy, And so it just depends on it's kind of like a who you know type of game, or who knows you, I guess you would say.
So you've won how many world championships?
Uh, 2 in Sport Jiu-Jitsu International, 1 in FILA, 1 in, Grappler's Quest World Series of Grappling. That's kind of a pseudo title. And then NAGA 1, and Pancrase 2.
When you say FILA, is that the same organization? Is that the same UWW? Is that the same organization that's running wrestling?
Yeah, yeah.
They've got their hands in both, huh?
Uh,
They've got
well,
their hands in wrestling and grappling, is what I'm saying.
yeah. They picked up grappling back in 2007, and so they've had world championships for the last 9, going on 10 years. And I think they're the best, to be honest. They're, in my opinion, they're the best because you have a legitimate world championship, whereas like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, and they're expanding. Don't get me wrong, but uh, the FILA UWW, they bring 30 plus nations. Everybody has to go through a qualification process. Everybody there is the number one guy from their country, and there you go. But with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, it's mostly a bunch of Brazilian dudes and some American guys with a couple of Europeans here and there. And so to call it a true world title is, I mean, it's true in the sense that it's the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but in terms of like the world, like all the countries are represented, it's not so much.
You get a lot better. You get a lot better representation at the UWWs.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah, I lived in Brazil, and guys will guys who just own like an MMA gym, they'll like start a tournament for whatever kickboxing Muay Thai. That I went to one when I was down there, and they had Muay Thai, they had kickboxing, they had jiu-jitsu, they had everything, and and they called it like the South American Championships, and it was in this dinky little town in Brazil, and and they actually, I knew nothing about MMA, and they actually had me be the judge for a professional fight because they wanted to say that they had a North American judge, a South American judge, and they had someone else there from some other country, I can't remember.
Yeah,
And I was like, okay.
nice.
I had no idea how to judge it. I just like kept tallies of what I thought were good shots and gave them my list. But so how do you get on the world team? Like how do you said the number one guy is represented at the UWW World Championships. How do you become that number one guy?
USA Wrestling has a grappling team, grappling world team trials. Um, Pretty much every year. There's been a couple years where it's been by application, just because they didn't have time or resources to put on a true world trials tournament. But it's basically a world team trials, just like you would go to the USA Wrestling World Team Trials. They're
You have qualifying tournaments like they do in
Yeah,
wrestling?
yeah, they used to. They don't so much anymore, just because I think USA Wrestling is kind of, uh, I think they're really missing an opportunity with grappling. They really have a chance to expand their brand and include grappling and build on the wrestling family, but they're really, in my opinion, not. They're choosing not to do that, and so they'll hold grappling world team trials, and basically it's an open tournament, but whoever wins that trials ends up going to the world championships, which is fine because everybody that goes there is super tough and super legit. They've all fought MMA or competed in grappling or jiu-jitsu in all these other different organizations as well. There's a number of us that have won medals in the IBJJF, as well as other organizations competing in. I feel like guys like Jeff Monson, I fought him a couple of times, once at the trials in 2008 and once in the world final in 2008. That was back when they allowed 2 representatives from each country just to help it get it started. That was a lot of fun. There's guys like Dennis Hallman, uh, Ben Askren. You had on the women's,
Askren's done some grappling. I mean, I know he's
yeah,
a big name in Bellator and stuff.
yeah, Askren won a FILA world title back in 2009. Kelly Anenson, he fought for a Bellator world title a while back. Jason Patino, he's IBJJF bronze medalist at the black belt level. He won a world title back in 2014 in FILA or UWW. So, I mean, there's guys that are just, all over the place. And when they come to UWW, they're there because they know they're going to have true international competition and be able to compete against those other countries. For me, it was kind of like in 2005, I went and watched my brother and was a training partner for the Greco-Roman World Championships. To me, it was very similar. They put on a very similar type of show or event. It was really well run. All the UWW FILA grappling events have been basically just run like a regular wrestling world championships, and it's a great atmosphere. It's a great feel, and I really enjoyed it.
So walk us through a grappling match at that level. What's the time periods? How's that work for someone that's foreign to it like me?
Time periods vary per organization. Typical is anywhere between 6 and 10 minutes.
Per period, or are you talking the whole match?
No, it's just one
It's one
all the way
round.
through. So similar to the old 5-minute or 6-minute matches that FILA used to have in wrestling. But you'll basically go that full time period, and then if you get a submission, you win. If you get points, you can also win on points. And it just kind of plays out like that. ADCC, they split it up. They'll actually have the first half of the match will be no points because they're trying to encourage submissions, and then the last half of the match they'll count points. But in my mind, I've never seen it work out how they want. They should just either do no points or they should just do points all the way through, because what happens is guys will stall out and just play real conservative the first half, because they know the only way that they will lose is by submission. And then the last half, they try to get all their points, and then it creates a lot more action. And so I think it kind of has the opposite effect of what they want it to. But, I mean, there's no perfect organization at this point. But the Abu Dhabi matches, they'll be 10 minutes. The first 5 minutes are no points. Second 5 minutes, there's points. And then for the finals, it's 10 minutes, no points, and then 10 minutes of points. So it's a 20-minute finals match.
Gotcha. Have you gotten Justin into this at all?
He's dabbled in it. I don't think he's gotten as excited about it as I have. He does a little bit down at a gym down south where he lives, but I don't think he does a lot of it. I mean, he's not trying to acquire belts and ranks and all that kind of stuff like I am.
Are you still teaching it?
Yeah, here and there. I have a few private students that I help out, but I'm not really teaching a big class per se. I do all of my teaching right now. I'm just doing out of my garage. I have a little garage space with some mats in there, and it's been working pretty well.
So if guys want to get some coaching from you, they just reach out to you personally?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
I'm always up for a new student here and there, but right now I just haven't done the big organized classes. It's just been easier just to do kind of private or small group type things.
So how do you get your training though? Because if you're just teaching newbies, they can't push you, I'm guessing.
I'm not necessarily teaching newbies.
Oh, you're teaching guys with some experience, huh?
Yeah.
So you're teaching and getting your training at the same time?
Well, yeah, I have guys that are experienced. I have a couple black belts that I train with. I have a couple advanced rank guys that I'm helping them develop their game. And so I'm not just taking guys fresh out of the box. And I really don't have a desire to do that right now. I would consider it depending on who the person is and what they're like. But generally speaking, I think you're going to get more out of it if you're a little further along for what I have to offer.
Cool. So what you mentioned, two questions. What you mentioned in this interview that you messed up your ACL, found out that was all screwed up, and then as you came back from that, you kind of transitioned into grappling. Was there a physical reason for that? Was it not as hard on your knees or things like that as wrestling? Or was it just it was time to be transitioning out of wrestling anyways?
Well, when I got finished with my mission, there was no more BYU wrestling. And so I had kind of always hoped that I'd have a chance to be able to continue to train with the collegiate guys and pursue some international wrestling type of stuff. That didn't work out. And so grappling was kind of the next best thing. And I went in and grappled with a guy named Mike Colby. He kicked my butt. And I said, well, I guess I will train under him. And so we did a lot of no-gi, and it just was that I didn't really want to reach out to the high school wrestlers. I was just having fun learning grappling and kind of doing something different. And then I went to watch Justin wrestle at one of the national tournaments and talked with Steve Frazier, and he said, hey, you were pretty good back in the day. What happened to you? And I just kind of told him my story. He's like, well, if you want to come out there, I can, get you a spot to be able to train at the Olympic Center. And that's really what I wanted to do for the longest time. And so I jumped on that opportunity and away I went. But really grappling was more a way to I guess keep my wrestling spirit alive, for lack of a better word. But I could have probably found a high school room somewhere and gotten comfortable, but I've always felt like wrestling and grappling has been sort of my quest, and that was just the next part of the quest. And then had the opportunity to go wrestle at the Olympic Center and just jumped on it. And I was able to keep on doing grappling. I met a guy named Sheldon Marr. He's actually been the U.S. team coach for UWW for the past 5-6 years. And I started going with him to tournaments, and he was my coach. And so while I was out in Colorado Springs, I would, when I wasn't competing in Greco-Roman, I would be competing in grappling or jiu-jitsu tournaments. And it worked. It was a good way to cross-train and kind of have a different perspective of things. I think my wrestling helped my jiu-jitsu, and my jiu-jitsu helped my wrestling in a different way. Practicing jiu-jitsu is not typically the best way to get ready for a wrestling match, but I was able to make it work just because of how I saw things, and so it worked for me. But
it didn't make you lay on your back, huh?
Not so much. It did allow me to take a few more risks than I think other wrestlers would take. This is back when, like around 2003 through 2006. So this is all during the time of the crazy clinch rules for Greco. And so you had a standing clinch, and then eventually became a parterre clinch. And so I was more willing to do sit-outs and things like that in the parterre clinch, which actually worked pretty well for me. If I got the guys balanced just right, I could usually put them on their back or get some kind of reversal. But that was because of jiu-jitsu. Now, I wouldn't recommend that for everyone, but I saw the opportunity, and so I was able to take advantage of some of those kind of things. But really, for me, transitioning to grappling was more just a way to just keep on doing more wrestling. I call it all wrestling, to be honest. I'll say, hey, hon, I'm going to go wrestling tonight. She's like, okay. And I don't think she really knows or cares if I'm going to go wrestle and take people down and try to pin them, or if I'm going to go try to submit them. And so it's all, I just talk about it as all wrestling. And really, once you look past, like, really the rules make the game. If you look at how wrestling and how grappling works, it's really a lot of the same things. I mean, there's only so many ways that you can twist, throw, trip, pin, or strangle the human body, and eventually you're going to be able to do all of them if you're on the right path.
Makes sense. I was going to ask that. We know that wrestling, is a good foundation for grappling and MMA and stuff. But would you say the reverse is true too? Does it help a wrestler to get involved in grappling and things like that?
If you want to be a good leg rider, I would say do jiu-jitsu. I think it has more applications for folk style wrestling than it does for freestyle or Greco-Roman, and here's why. So what most wrestlers don't understand is that folk style wrestling actually comes from submission wrestling. It comes from catch as catch can, which originated back in Europe, and it traveled to the United States and eventually became a folk style. You might have ever asked yourself, why can't I figure four the head, or why can't I scissor the head, or why can't I figure four the body? Well, the answer is because if you scissor the head, if I scissor your head, I can submit you and or break your neck. If I figure four your body, I'm going to break your ribs or crack your back. And so a lot of those moves that are illegal are because they're submissions. And a lot of guys don't know that. I mean, even wrestling coaches don't know, and a lot of them don't even care. But if you add the submissions back into folk style wrestling, you would have a lot more dynamic product, and I think it would be a lot more fun in some regards. There's a number of guys like Jake Shannon with Scientific Wrestling that are trying to bring back catch can wrestling, and they're starting to put on tournaments and things like that. I think the struggle that they have is that there are so many folk style wrestlers that are just strictly focused on folk style and can't open up enough to see that there is the opportunity to do submissions and things like that. And it is a lot of fun because if you can pin or submit, now you have more ways to win. You have more things to play with and more opportunity, and it just makes it a lot more fun. But the leg rides, especially from jiu-jitsu, where you're trying to get hooks and you're trying to get a backpack control, I can leg ride now, and I'm a really good leg rider, but it's all because I learned it through jiu-jitsu. I was never very good at all with legs, either offensively or defensively as a folk style collegiate wrestler. But now that I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, I'm like, okay, let's put legs in and I'll put you on your back, or I'll get off, I can escape from legs or whatever, simply because I've learned how to use that through jiu-jitsu. So if you have a folk style guy that wants to get better at legs, I'd say spend a lot of time with jiu-jitsu, because you start to learn that you can still be on your side and not be pinned. Whereas with wrestling, you're always constantly worried about, oh, I'm pinning myself. Jiu-jitsu, you don't have that fear, and so you kind of operate from a different mindset. It allows you to relax and really learn and understand the position, or at least that's how it was for me. And I really enjoyed that because it helped me open up another part of my wrestling game that was never there before. So when I have athletes that are trying to use the legs or that want to use legs, I'm much better suited to coach them now because I understand the principles behind it.
Gotcha. So in the Utah area, are there any gyms you'd recommend for people that are just beginning, that want to get into grappling?
Yeah, just go. I would say do this. Go interview the instructors. That's basically their job interview, because you're hiring them. It's one of the few times in your life where you will be able to do that, instead of being the guy asked the questions by the employer. You're the employer asking the questions. I would go with questions about how they run their school. I would try to find out what their team's goals are, who's there, what the environment's like. Is it a real good fit for you? Most of the gyms are rather clannish, and so it's similar to like a high school wrestling team. I know back in the day we hated West Jordan because they were West Jordan, and I was on Taylorsville. They're nice people. I lived in West Jordan. It's nothing wrong with West Jordan. It's just the rivalry, and that was just part of it. And so you get some of that with jiu-jitsu schools as well. But if one of them fits, then you might as well stay there. So I don't know that I would really recommend one over the other, because it's not a one size fits all type of a solution or type of a game.
Right. Yeah. And it also depends if you're just doing it for a workout versus actually trying to compete like you are.
Yeah, like every group is different. Like some places, like they're more family friendly. Other places are more hardcore fighter type environments. And so you've really got to decide, hey, do I want to be around a bunch of tattooed MMA fighters, or do I want to be around, other people that have families and careers and that are going to be more of a family oriented type place. So it's really just up to the individual. And I'm friends with a lot of different people in the community, and I hate to give a recommendation for one guy without giving it to the other, but I would really say that it's up to you as the practitioner to go find out someplace that feels like the right place. And I think you'll have a good experience if you do it that way.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks for being on. I'll let you get going. It's late. I wanted you on though because I've had some guys that have gone from wrestling to MMA, and I know there's a lot of guys out there that like the idea of continuing doing something, like the idea of fighting even, but aren't necessarily in love with getting their face beat in or beating in other people's faces. So I thought grappling was another option that I wanted to let people know about. So thanks for your time, Brandon.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, man. Take care.
Hey, thanks, Kurt.
Yep, we'll see you.